Comrades, over the past year, we have seen seeds of the greater struggles to come. And as a organizer of the national student movement, I'm not just talking about that movement and the major mobilizations that it's been able to pull off. And these, they weren't just students, but it was education workers, which teachers are. I think a lot of times we're taught that teachers aren't workers, in fact they are workers. Parents, and community members, and other activists that went out in the streets in droves on March 4th and October 7th, and all the way back to November of last year. But I'm also talking about the October 2nd mobilization that was fairly large. Many of us were there. And even the festival, I hate to mention it, but everything has its contradictions, but the one-day festival by Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, which a lot of people who were liberal, progressive, probably went to it. They were further confused by it because it was a very confusing event, telling people not to be angry, don't go out on the streets and protest, but let's just all work together. And no, we can't work with the right or the ultra-right, nor do we want to. So that was the wrong message to send. But it called a lot of people to DC, and a lot of people that were generally, a lot of them may have been progressive. And it was a political mess, and it's something that we have to deal with, and it equated Marxists with the ultra-right, amongst other things that are unfortunate about it. But we're not talking about Colbert and Stewart, we're talking about the people that mobilized and are actually there. I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm talking about socialism, but I'm going to get there. But I want to talk a little bit about March 4th and October 7th and what it means. And go a little bit back to November of last year in California, the students in California and education workers, and how the movement grew out of the anger and frustration there and the mobilizations there. And they were in response to not only the cutbacks, the draconian cutbacks in California, but also an increase in the tuition of the UC system. And we saw huge demonstrations, takeovers of buildings, and it laid the groundwork for what was to come in March 4th, which was a massive mobilization across the country of tens of thousands of people in the community, students, teachers, parents, in response to the cutbacks in general, but specifically in education. And on October 7th was the next mobilization that was called by the students that organized, called for March 4th, and it was not as large or just as dynamic and militant in its actions, and still it was citizen crisis began, and since the cutbacks started happening, it was one of the largest nationwide mobilizations in response to it. And as I said, these were in defense of public education against attacks in general, but one of the things that we see is that the education sector is under a very large attack. Teachers are being attacked, and teachers' unions are being attacked. As revolutionaries, as Marxists, we know that, there's workers who sell their laboring power to the bosses who ultimately will overthrow the system. And that's because of the system itself. Capitalism is based off exploitation, for profit. And that if we look at the system itself, in Fred's document, he talks about how at one point universal public education was needed to prepare the workers that were going, the students, the young people who were going to become workers for future generations. It was needed for the health of working people and the future workers. But the system itself, the ruling class, isn't so much need in as much because of the scientific technological revolution, because of imperialist globalization that has created this global competition for jobs and for survival. And so they have been drawing back on public education, the funding of it, but also along with that, we have seen that the ruling class has wanted more and more to get their hands on the billions of dollars that is put into the public education system. And they do this in various ways, such as hedge funds, funding the building of these new schools, and then the schools themselves leasing them from the hedge funds and the tax breaks, and they're able to double the amount of money that they put into it within a matter of 4 years or so. It's a profit-making thing for them. A lot of Walmart, Bill Gates, some of the most right-wing foundations that are get their funding by large capitalists, they have been lobbying hard to get raised to the top passed, which increases the number of charters per state because it's in their interest, because they see the money that they can steal, your money, public money, and use it to fill their coffers. So education is not only being cut back, but it's being privatized. And with this, we understand that it also leads to greater segregation. And let's not fool ourselves. The public school system has been segregated for a long time. It was first official, now it's de facto. And they have these separate ways of funding by property values. Whereas where the property values have been devalued because of white flight and investment in those areas, they get less funding than they would in the suburbs, which have higher property values. And I don't want to get too deep in that. Obviously we're going to talk about that, but there's a reason why I brought that up. Now we understand that this attack is an attack against the workers in general. It's also a racist attack. I think that we also, in this society, because of the way the capitalists have developed their wealth, we have to have the lens of national oppression firmly fitted always. But when we talk about a better society, we talk about the one that we have now first, and we look at the way that this society prioritizes things, that it's based off of exploitation. And in a time such as this that we live in now, in permanent crisis, they don't so much see the necessity of a universal public education because of the way that the system is built off of exploitation, that capitalism is the order of the day. And we also see that they are much more interested and find it much more to their advantage, or at least they used to, not so much anymore, because wars don't so much bring in the money. As a matter of fact, they take a lot of money away, and massive amounts of it spent to wage war, but it doesn't benefit them the way that it used to. Dumping all that money in the Pentagon used to be able to turn things around, but it doesn't so much because of technology, and these aren't very labor intensive as much as they are technology. A lot of these weapons are built by machines and computers and stuff like that. But they still wage these wars in the interest of forcing open markets and stealing resources underneath people's feet. And so that is a priority to them. Bailing out banks and financial institutions, that is a priority for them because they're too big to fail. Education is not a priority. Healthcare is not a priority. Any need that we deserve a right to is not a priority for us. It is a priority that they put more cops with better equipment on the streets. It is a priority that they use those cops to brutalize and harass poor people of color, especially as developers want to come back into the inner city area so they can push people out. That is a priority to them. But we need something better. Is that right? And it has to be based off of solidarity. Is that right? It has to be based off of providing for people's needs. And that you can never have that under capitalism. Everything that we've had because we gave our blood and our sweat, and we got down on the streets and we grinded it out and we fought for it. And right now, we don't see that struggle in the streets, but it will return to the streets, and we can help it, but we have to push it further beyond the point of defense into something better, for something better, and that something better is socialism. If you look at Cuba, and if we want to talk about the special period in Cuba, it was a much more severe downturn in terms of what was lost and the suffering of the people than what is happening here today. They lost 85% of their foreign trade overnight, and they were faced with starvation. But they didn't close not one hospital, not one school, the needs of people continue to be met. And yes, people did go a little bit hungry because they weren't able to provide as much, but everybody suffered. You were told that the cutbacks are painful and we just have to swallow it. All the while the profits of the banks and financial institutions increase. And they have returned to giving their bonuses to these managers, so they're not suffering. Bill Gates is not going to suffer. The CEOs of Bank of America, they ain't going to suffer. But you got to suffer. Because that is the way that the system works. And that is what we're here to talk about today. We're at a point, comrades, where this crisis is not going to go away. We're going to face continued high unemployment and suffering. And for people of color, it's always been depression, but it's genocidal now. So as the struggle picks up, as we help it pick up, we have to point a way forward, and we have to show people your best interest is to overturn this brutal, racist, oppressive system and to build a system of solidarity and needs for everyone, and that system is socialism. We have to come out of the closet and we have to say it straight and make it plain. We need a revolution in this country, and it is up to us to do it. All power to the people.